Well, welcome everyone, and thank you. I see a lot of familiar faces from the last time we were having a conversation about this project, so I appreciate the repeat audience for this conversation, and hopefully turns into a great dialogue around some alternatives and sort of a menu of options that we're bringing forward. So hopefully towards the end of this conversation, we're building some consensus around some options that we want to carry forward into the next phase of development for the downtown area. So just really quickly on the front end, my name's Karen Sentoff. I work for VHB. We are an engineering firm here in Vermont. I'm joined by my colleague, Joe Vanacore. He has helped a ton with the development of these alternatives. So he knows some of the intricacies even better than I do, so he is here to help us answer any questions that come up. And really the crux of the evening, again, is to have a conversation about some of the alternatives that we've developed and hopefully get to sort of a menu of options that we want to carry forward from this point on into sort of the next phases of project development. So I'll take us through just a couple of things here, a couple of welcome and introduction items to add to that, a little bit about the project schedule and sort of where we are in the process, a little bit of background information that we want to just carry forward and touch on, and then we'll jump into the project purpose and needs, sort of the thing that compels the work that we're doing and compels moving some of these things into the next phase. And then really dig into the alternatives that we're carrying here and hopefully have some conversation about what we'd like, what we don't like, what our preferences are around those alternatives. And then talk a little bit about next steps. I do want to acknowledge we are so privileged to be partnering with Kristen and with Tracy on this effort on the town's behalf. And recognize that we're also, we've looped in our partners at the State Agency of Transportation and have had some conversations with them around the alternatives that we're presenting this evening as well. So they're sort of in the know and in the loop and part of the conversation, especially when we think about progressing into the next phase, sort of having them on board and an understanding of what we're identifying as some options for improving things. Just at a high level, we were here back in July to have an initial conversation around this project and have been busy developing alternatives since then. We are here at that presentation and hopefully, in the next month or so, refining based on what we hear tonight, refining those alternatives to land at a preferred alternative that we can carry forward and hopefully move into the next phase of project development. And then we will have a presentation to the select board sometime in the new year to basically confirm and hopefully gain an endorsement of that alternative so that as we move through the next steps, we sort of have that momentum behind us. And then we'll wrap all that up into a final scoping report to sort of document the whole process and document things so that as we move things into the next phase, we have that to reference later on. All right, just a little overview here for folks that are maybe new to the project and weren't with us the last time we had a conversation around this. This is the focal area of this study, so really at a sort of 30,000 foot level here, we're looking at South Main Street and Mill Street, essentially from where the pedestrian bridge connects into the system, all the way over to the town parcel, sort of at the gateway into downtown Hardwick to the east there on Mill Street. We did do a site walk the last time we were out here just to really assess sort of the existing condition and help us to understand in more detail. We certainly had a lot of data and information that we collected as part of that existing conditions review, but really helpful to ground truth things and certainly, identified a number of things, some disrepair in the sidewalk system as it is today, and really when we're focusing on pedestrians and sort of enhancing their experience along this corridor, thinking about, making sure folks are comfortable, our sidewalks are accessible. Also, a number of things that came up just that we identified and could be part of sort of the next phase in terms of design, some of the stormwater challenges, some places where debris collects and that sort of thing. You can see some of the indication of that in the pictures here. And then, just conscious of some of the access management challenges, some of the sort of big open driveways and really sort of ill-defined spaces that there are real opportunities there in terms of defining space and letting folks know where it makes sense to be walking, where it makes sense to be driving a vehicle. So really thinking through sort of helping to define those spaces and make it feel more comfortable for folks that are walking. And thank you for joining us. Feel free to come in and sit down, and no worries there. A few key takeaways from the local concerns meeting that we heard. We had a lot of conversation that's all documented and will be part of the sort of final scoping report that we produce, so that all of that is in the public realm. But just a couple of high-level takeaways. Certainly we heard that the speeds through the corridor are a challenge for folks and make it feel pretty uncomfortable to be in the downtown. Really identifying that sort of transition zone from where it turns into a town highway and into the village. That's certainly a challenging location, and thinking through some improvements there. The Glenside Avenue intersection with Mill Street, certainly a challenge and something that we dug into a little bit deeper just to understand sort of the possibilities there in terms of bringing forward some constructible alternatives. Pedestrian facilities, certainly a focus and something we heard loud and clear, especially crosswalks and sidewalk safety and connectivity. The Mill Street and Main Street intersection, recognizing there is that desire line and a missing crosswalk at that intersection. So thinking through what that might look like. And then hearing some of the challenges in terms of traffic patterns. Folks, when there's cars not parked near the intersection, folks are sort of using that as a turn lane. Some unexpected sort of, movements at that location that we wanted to dig into more deeply. Definitely heard that there's some opportunities with the town parcel that was acquired after the flooding to the east, and so thinking about, what is the future sort of hold for that parcel and some connectivity options to that. And then had some conversation around the post office and the access and driveway and some of the challenges turning out of the post office there. So lots of conversation. It was a great and engaged conversation. Many of you were there. Really appreciate all the input, and certainly helped to illuminate some of the issues so we could dig in a little bit deeper. This is just one additional sort of data point that I wanted to pull forward and just have a quick conversation around, and helped us in terms of sort of that compelling need for this work. This is along, at least Mill Street is considered a high crash location segment. And some of that analysis is a little outdated. That's hinged on some older crash data. But then when we dig into the more recent data, you're seeing the sort of 2020 to 2024 crashes here. And we do have some, locations that have had pedestrian crashes, some vehicular crashes that have resulted in injury. So we're using that information to help just inform, what's going on and dig into those crash reports a little bit deeper to understand, are there other sort of traffic movements or conflicts that we should be paying attention to as we look to alternatives. All right, so the project purpose and need, this really helps us, especially in the next phase. It's sort of defining, again, what is compelling this work and helps us to really sort of justify the funding going forward to do this good work. And so it's our way of sort of laying that groundwork, and it's also a way that we sort of can evaluate different options that are on the table for making improvements and making sure that we're sort of meeting the need that we've identified for the project. And so the purpose of the study as we've defined it is to create a safe, comfortable environment in the village core and establish a clear transition to the multimodal core area, improve connectivity of the pedestrian network to support access to community destinations, including businesses and recreational resources, and improve multimodal transportation connectivity and infrastructure. And some of the needs that are compelling this, we really look to some of the deficiencies that highlight the needs for the study and for the improvements going forward. So a lack of an effective transition zone from high-speed rural highway to village center, non-continuous pedestrian network, capacity to handle increased multimodal activity, particularly from the LVRT, but certainly from other sort of recreational opportunities. And then additional infrastructure deficiencies, including vehicle turning movement issues, missing or inadequate crosswalks, and impaired stormwater drainage. Not meant to be, fully exhaustive, but really trying to sort of define some of those needs that, again, sort of help to compel, moving the project forward and making sure these improvements happen. Conceptual alternatives. So in the next many slides, we're going to step through the alternatives that we're pulling forward here. And I think a couple of things to be thinking about as we step through these alternatives. The first thing is that the alternatives build on each other. So there are 3 alternatives, and I like to think of it as sort of a menu of options with each alternative. And as we step through, they sort of build on one another. So the first alternative has some options that are on the menu that we could select from. And then the second alternative sort of adds to that menu of options. And certainly there's some conversations around different trade-offs for different menu items that are available for us to select. But we can sort of talk through some of those trade-offs and some of the needs that we were trying to address with different menu options. So we'll sort of step through that and be a little patient with me. It is a lot to take in, and so certainly we can pause and open it up to questions if folks have sort of clarifying questions as we step through, and then we can discuss it and have more of a dialogue around it after. So at a first glance, I'm just going to highlight that sort of 30,000-foot view here, some of the elements that you'll see in each alternative, and then we'll dig in deeper and zoom way in so you can sort of see what those options are. So with alternative 1, we're sort of calling this like the baseline treatment option. And so with this alternative, some of the pieces that you'll see, and I guess trying to decide where I should point, but I'm going to pick this one. All right. So with this alternative, we're really thinking about flush sidewalks through here just to define the space for pedestrians. You will see some bulb outs at the intersection and some improvements to the existing sidewalk. And then it really contemplates sort of a continuous sidewalk along the north side of Mill Street. And then just some improvements to some of the existing infrastructure that's out there in terms of improving the sidewalk segment in front of the public parking on Mill Street on the south side. We do contemplate some vegetation clearing just to help with some of the sightline challenges around Glenside Avenue. And again, thinking through flush sidewalk in front of the gas station here, and just, again, really trying to define that space for pedestrians. At a high level for alternative 2, again, really zoomed out view, and we will zoom way in, so bear with me. Many of the same options that we were seeing in the first alternative in terms of that continuous sidewalk along the north side, the sidewalk improvements here along South Main Street, and then the bulb outs at the intersection of Main Street and Mill Street, really bringing into the fold that missing crossing and sort of more enhancements to those bulb outs, so it really makes folks slow down and take those turns intentionally, and introduces sort of that pedestrian connectivity. And then in this option, it does contemplate some other changes on the south side, including a swap in terms of where the driveway is for the post office. That's one thing that we heard. There are some challenges around that sight line, so thinking about an option where that driveway is defined a little bit differently, and bringing in some curbing elements to really define that space sooner as sort of a space that is a little more constrained and folks need to slow down on the south side here. And then it does contemplate removing the slip lane and realigning Glenside Avenue so that it's more of a teed up intersection. So just sort of rethinking that geometry. And again, that would be coupled with some vegetation clearing and helping to improve that sight line. Yes, so what we're contemplating at Glenside Avenue in this alternative is to remove the slip lane, so remove the sort of Y geometry at that intersection, and really tee it up so it comes in more at a right angle to Mill Street. And then again, coupling that with some of the vegetation clearing to gain a little more in terms of the sight line. And again, we'll zoom way in and look at these in more detail, but this is sort of high level, so you can see some of the elements that we're adding to the menu of options here. So alternative 3, this one contemplates, again, many of the same elements we saw in alternative 2, but there's a couple of new things that come into the fold. And this option is really thinking about creating not only that sort of pedestrian connectivity on the north side of Mill Street, but also that pedestrian connectivity on the south side. And there are some real trade-offs on this one. So for this one, it contemplates dead-ending Sumner Street and reestablishing the hillside so that we can have a continuous sidewalk along the south side of Mill Street. And that's really based on, you all know Sumner Street is very, very steep, and there's really not a way for us to flatten out at the bottom of that hill and that slope to have a safe sidewalk along that stretch without making Sumner even steeper coming out of that intersection. And so this is really an idea that bubbled up as part of the local concerns meeting, and we wanted to pull forward and think about what that could look like. And with that, we were really thinking through, then a connected sidewalk all the way through in front of the public parking, really defining those driveways, and then really thinking through a change in where the Glenside Avenue intersection comes in and meets Mill Street. So moving the intersection to essentially the crest of the hill that you come over as you come into town. And what that enables us to do is really have that sight line. So when you pull up to the intersection, you'll be able to see that traffic coming around the curve and into town. And so that's sort of a big change in terms of geometry and certainly in terms of impacts to the parcel on the corner there. So we'll talk a little more in more detail about that one. And then it contemplates a pedestrian path into the town parcel to the east here. And I think there are some ideas about what that ultimately becomes, but if we're thinking forward and thinking that's going to become sort of a green space and a place more like a park space that folks can access, really thinking through creating some connectivity to that space. Yep.
Did you mention the gateway treatment?
Oh, absolutely. I did gloss over those, but yes. So with each one of these, we are bringing forward and thinking through some gateway treatments. Mostly at this juncture, that is, some bigger gateway signage, welcome to Hardwick, that sort of thing. We tossed around the idea of some other elements that we could introduce, but it is a little tricky with where the town highway, Class 1 town highway starts and where the state highway ends. And so I think, in terms of other treatments, we weren't really pulling on anything specific, but certainly if folks have thoughts about that and want to dig in further to that, we can. All right, so zooming in on alternative 1 in a little more detail here. This is showing in a slightly different orientation, South Main Street here. And so what we're looking at, and I'll jump back over here. I apologize for the folks that I'm around the corner on, but so South Main Street, really enhancing the definition of this sidewalk through here that would be flush, so we'd still be able to have vehicles coming in and out of Mike's, but defining that space really, really well so folks know where they should be, and improving some of the challenging sort of hazards and elements that are in that space right now, and really helping to smooth that out. We would maintain this sort of shoulder space that is currently utilized as sort of an informal truck loading, unloading area. So we definitely want to retain that, but again, helping to define that space. This also contemplates, bike landing areas, either at the sort of entryway to the pedestrian bridge, or we had talked about at the Peace Park. This also contemplates some bulb outs and some mountable treatments at the corners, and again, really thinking about getting folks to slow down and turn intentionally, but still sort of having those mountable pieces so we can get a bigger vehicle through there. No problem, they'll track over that mountable curb. In this option, we don't have that crossing, and so that's something to think about and sort of a differentiator as we step into the next alternative. And then, what am I missing on this one? I think that's all the components on this. Oh, and then just a couple of impacts in terms of there's some drainage impacts on this one. There is a structure here that we would have to move, and some sign impacts in terms of moving some existing signage.
And also retaining the same parking in front of the inn.
Yes, retaining, Joe just added that with this one we are retaining sort of the same parking configuration that's there today in front of the inn.
But losing one in front of the laundry mat.
Yes.
Yeah, the one in front of the laundry
There's
mat,
two.
no people use, but technically it's an illegal space. You're not
The
allowed
one
to
that
have-
is hatched.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's supposed, 20 feet, you're not supposed to have any parking but people park.
Yes.
So.
It's not well delineated, it's not.
So that's the same
So
across the
then
street.
it's yeah. Could be the same.
It'd be the same thing,
On the other side,
all the way up the Hardwick Inn.
if you can't do 20 feet.
So this would retain the same crossing location, so I think we're retaining the same parking layout as before. It would just have a mountable curb closer to that first parking space.
Right. That question about Hardwick Inn, there's no crosswalk in this one going across from left to right. Therefore, that 20-foot rule is only when you're approaching a crosswalk.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
But there will be crosswalk there.
If you go to
If we
another
go to the
option.
crosswalk.
On this next segment, looking more focused on Mill Street, just a couple of things to call out. Through the north side, sort of continuous sidewalk here, we are looking to define some of these driveways, so it will be a raised sidewalk with then, driveway aprons along that length. And it also contemplates, just some enhancements to the existing crossing that's there that's missing some elements, including the signage. So sort of enhancing the landings and the signage that would be associated with that crossing, as well as just, redoing the sidewalk on the south side through the public parking to sort of create that connection to the north side. We're also showing sharrows throughout. I know this was a recommendation that was pulled forward from, I think it was the Loop study that was done. So in terms of, I think they were more focused on connectivity to the LVRT and some low-hanging fruit of improvements. So we carried those forward in terms of having the sharrows. And just recognizing this is a really constrained environment. So we really don't have the space to have like a defined bike lane. So in recognition of that and the sort of traffic calming we're trying to achieve, felt like the sharrows was a good way to go for just making that awareness that bikes could be using the space as well.
Where's the brakes in the sidewalk at Jiffy Mart?
So in this one, it would be flush through the entire, so we'd be defining that space and having a concrete sidewalk, but it would be flush with the driveway and access around it. And then here, a little bit further to the east, we see just the vegetation removal at the Glenside Avenue intersection. And we're contemplating planting a tree line, just again, to help to make it feel like it's, a little tighter. That is one of the sort of countermeasures that we can use in that transition zone to make folks feel like it's a defined space and you should slow down. And then the welcome sign a little further to the east to sort of establish that you are entering a place and give that indication to folks. And right now there's a tiny, teeny little green sign that says Hardwick. All right, zooming in even closer to the intersection of Main Street and Mill Street, and really just highlighting again some of those impacts. So we'd be moving the stop sign just so it has better visibility, moving that drainage that I mentioned on sort of the northeast corner there, having some accessible ramps to the parking. We're not defining any ADA parking in this one, but at least having the ramps there to sort of serve folks, even if there's someone with a stroller that's coming up to the sidewalk level, it's really helpful. And just really defining those spaces and crossings a little bit better with those bulb outs. All right, stepping into some of the detail on alternative 2. And again, sort of keeping in mind that we're looking at a whole menu of options that we can, at the end of the evening, sort of pick and choose from. So keep that in mind, not everything in alternative 2 has to move forward if alternative 2 is sort of most of the things are what we want to see. So just keep that in mind. So again, here on South Main Street, a little bit of a tipped orientation. And so again, thinking about where we can capture folks that are coming off of the LVRT or are coming into town via bike, having a bike landing place for them, whether that's at the pedestrian bridge and sort of the landing place in front of it or the Peace Park. Thinking about, again, that flush sidewalk and defining the space. In this option, we are adding the crosswalk in front of the inn and sort of that connection that's missing on the north side of the intersection. In this one, we are, again, ramping up to the sidewalk level from that parking, but we would lose a parking space in this alternative to sort of enable, again, that space that we need distance from the crosswalk. For that parking. In this one, again, bulb outs would be mountable where you see sort of the red pattern so that we still can move trucks through the space. In this option, we just want to sort of highlight that we would be addressing some of the stormwater drainage issues on the existing bulb outs on the other side of the street. There are just a few ideas that we've been contemplating around, some of the improvements there. And then moving along Mill Street here, a couple of things to highlight. So on the north side, again, really thinking through that continuous sidewalk, so very similar to what we saw on the previous alternative, enhancing that crossing in front of the market between the public parking and the market, establishing that curbed sidewalk on the south side to create that connectivity. In this one, we are contemplating that shift, sort of flip-flopping the driveway access for the post office and giving them a little more room from the parking to sort of be able to see that visibility in that sight line. And reestablishing the sidewalk on the other side. And just want to move this out of my way to see if there's, yeah, okay, and then sorry, that's in a tough spot. And then the Mill Street, Glenside Avenue intersection, this one we'd be contemplating sort of removing that Y and really bringing it in to be a little less complex. So one place that you could come in and out of, sort of shifting that geometry and bringing the intersection a little closer to the crest of the hill, so gaining a little bit in terms of the visibility there. Again, on this one, a little bit further east and sort of in that transition zone from the highway, really thinking about, the welcome sign, planting the tree line, again, really trying to get folks to recognize that they're entering a place where they should be slowing down and thinking about what they're doing and not just driving a 2-lane rural highway. And then again, we touched on the vegetation removal and Glenside Avenue intersection improvements. Zooming way in on the Mill Street, Main Street intersection here. Just a couple of things to highlight, again, in terms of some of those trade-offs or impacts of this one. So again, we'd be modifying the angle of this parking to accommodate 2 spaces. I think today there's 3. So, we're losing a space, but we're gaining an accessible space in this scenario and ramping up to be able to serve that space and get folks to sidewalk level. Again, the sort of mountable bulb outs, but with this one, have that crossing to serve that desire line for folks to be crossing on the north side of the intersection. And again, in this one, moving some signs, moving some drainage to accommodate that configuration. Zooming way in on the Glenside Avenue intersection, again, sort of the current edge of pavement is right along my sort of line here that I'm making with my finger. So we'd be taking away this part of the Y, reestablishing some pavement through here, certainly some implications in terms of there is a big utility pole in that little triangle, so we'd be moving some utilities in this case, but really teeing in this intersection and changing the geometry, removing some of the vegetation on the hillside to help to enable a little bit more visibility there. And I think that's it for that one. All right, and then stepping through alternative 3, and again with this one, think about, we're building on some additional menu options that we can be thinking about pulling forward in a preferred alternative. So again, zooming in on South Main Street here and thinking through some of the pieces, many of the same pieces that we saw in the previous alternative in terms of this segment. So a lot of similarities here, not a lot of differentiators in terms of both the elements or the impacts. Then shifting to Mill Street, this is where this sort of menu of options grows. So with this one, really thinking through creating that sort of continuous sidewalk on the south side. And so with this, again, it's thinking through dead-ending Sumner Street, so reestablishing the hillside here where that connection is today, and being able to carry this sidewalk all the way through, past the post office and this house beyond to the public parking. And with this one, it is also contemplating, in this zoomed in, you can see it a little better, consolidating the two crosswalks to one. So thinking about, removing the crosswalk that's a little closer to the post office and removing the crosswalk that, currently has pavement markings but no signage at the market, and consolidating them into one that would sort of serve both of those purposes, and just thinking through maybe what that would look like.
Could you extend that parking lot into that, where you eliminate the end of that street?
That is a great question.
Because you're already eliminating, like, the laundromat, they got one parking space in front.
Yeah. So it would require, if you can sort of, in your mind's eye, think about what that looks like. There is a pretty significant retaining wall along the backside of that parking. So it would require a pretty significant retaining wall to create that space for parking. But it's a great idea to sort of add to the number of spaces available, especially in light of maybe losing a space or two further down.
That was ledge there, they had to blast for that, to put in that parking lot and do the wall, so it's not just a simple.
Yeah, it may be ledge is what you're saying underneath.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be perfect though. I mean, we're taking spots out and we need spots there. Not just at the laundromat, just on that side of town, there's no parking
Yeah.
in general.
No,
And we're taking minimum 2 spots.
we didn't dig in too deeply, so it's helpful to understand that historic knowledge of that being ledge there.
Well, one other problem with that is that I'm a resident on the corner of Sumner and Holton Hill, and you can't go up the hill in the wintertime. Our town crew do great work with the plowing and whatnot, but you can't go up the hill from my driveway half the time.
Yeah.
You have to only go downhill. And if you the entry from Sumner to Glenside, I don't know if you've ever experienced that in the wintertime, you can't make that one the other way that easily. Go up and get there.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Come out
it
my
makes
driveway
an
and go,
impossibility.
I can't come out my driveway, I have the last house on the right on Sumner Street.
Yeah.
I cannot come out of my driveway and make a right-hand turn to go toward Glenside. I can't.
Yeah.
And it's even worse coming up the other, coming from Glenside onto Sumner. So I would have to go up to Holton Hill, up Holton Hill, and come down by the elementary school,
Yeah.
which makes more of a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You also have the problem with plowing with the town crews, plowing Sumner Street, so now you've blocked it off.
Yeah, where
They've
it's
got to
right.
back up a plow.
Yeah.
where do you put the snow?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely hear you on that. I do think that this would likely have to be coupled with some sort of turnaround at the top of the hill. Yeah, it's tight up there, for sure.
And the other thing is emergency services would have a hard time accessing there as well. A rescue or fire as well. That would, it's really a bad idea.
Yeah, and like I said, definitely an idea that bubbled up as part of the previous conversation. So, we wanted to look at some of the implications of that. I think the trade-off is, having a continuous sidewalk on that south side. With the current connection, it really is, not an available option on the table to have that sidewalk connection. So just recognizing that.
Doing that. I do use that all the time, that walkway from the parking lot to the post office. And if you have to eliminate at 56 Mill Street, they're concrete block because there's a continuous puddle that runs down the street. It's there all the time. They pave it with the truck traffic. It's a continuous puddle, and you can't get out of the way. So pedestrians are still in harm's way if they do
Sure.
sidewalk or no sidewalk.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Go ahead.
Well, you know what my initial idea was, because it's kind of disappointing not to see it. However, I do understand that you're working on the Mill Street area.
Yep.
But my solution, though, might be cost effective, not cost effective, I don't know, for the whole town. But in my opinion, would be best for everybody. So, would you enlighten everybody, if you can remember, what my solution was? Just so they have it in their mind.
For the Sumner Street,
Yes. You remember?
I don't know if I'm recalling off the top of my head. You might have to jog my memory.
Can I stand?
Sure.
So my solution was
Oh,
creating a driveway
yeah.
from here to here, creating all the parking space here. Because I own this property, which I'm willing to donate to the town to create that space.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's optional with the Mill Street property. But I was throwing it out there that cutting off this section to Sumner Street would eliminate Marcia's problem being able to go up this hill. So now you have an access point all the way around, because this entire property right here is mine. Right? So these parking spaces, you have all these parking spaces that could be created.
So this would be a road with parking?
Yes.
Yeah, that's, I was just thinking, that's a much easier, it makes it easier to get out on the main.
But I know it doesn't in line with, and I just threw it out there, I know it doesn't in line with their solution to the Mill Street problem, because that's really all that they're addressing today, correct?
Yeah, it is.
And I know
it is
you.
a little beyond the
I know,
scope of
it's beyond
this.
the scope of
this
things,
effort.
but it might be something that the town may want to consider at a later time. Again, I don't need this. I don't have any reason for this. If I can pass it through the engineering department at the post office and make it happen, I'm willing to do that. But it's not going to be at the expense of the post office. It's going to be at the expense of the town. But you're creating all that parking space and an access point for Sumner Street. You can create this wall that you're talking about here, which I suggested putting in steps here. And even with the post office, you can put in steps here to get down to the post office. So this is useless land.
It would also, for your present parking lot, you get jammed up, people coming in, coming out. With the parking, it would make it circular.
Yeah. And the only way that this is gonna happen too is
if
also
all the
with the
parking
engineering department at the post office, who I said that I'd be willing to change it. I can change the lift, I can change the parking spots here and make them horizontal this way. And then everybody would be parking this way, and our trucks could still come in. But this can't happen without the engineering approval, which I'm pretty sure I can get it passed based on the safety issues that we have. But that was my proposal, and I just wanted to throw that out there for those of you who weren't here.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that back to the fore. And I think one of the things that we sort of stopped at the point of, we wanted to see is closing Sumner Street on the table. And I think having that trade-off of potentially looping through and creating that connectivity is one of the things we want to contemplate for sure. But we didn't want to dig too deeply in there if we felt like as a community that was not an option we wanted to carry forward. So if it is, we can dig a little bit deeper in terms of the preferred alternative, dig into what that would entail to move that piece forward. Yeah, go ahead in the back.
So, great idea. The only thing is bringing it down into that side street that dumps back onto Main, that corner there. That's a terrible corner to pull out of too. because of traffic coming around that corner. Granted, you're trying to slow it down, but that's a terrible intersection.
And the building, a new building there, there's a lot more, move it off.
Yeah, the sight lines are bad.
Yeah. And you probably want to move the crosswalk again.
Need a street light.
I think once you add the
Take care
other
of all the
two,
birds with one car.
I think once you add the other two solutions to the bump outs,
Yeah.
it might be better. I mean, for me, my carriers drive down there every day to and from, and I wouldn't have them go down there if it wasn't, if they didn't have visibility, because I have to test that myself. And I hear what you're saying, but it's still a better alternative than what we're dealing with already. So it isn't gonna create a solution per se, it's going to give you the kind of the same visibility, just in a different location. And that's my opinion.
Is Hardwick ready for traffic control?
All right, please.
Perfect time to do it.
Yeah.
But, so coming off Glenside on
That's
foot,
what you needed, I think.
it's very hard to get to Mill Street because there's no sidewalk and there's just a ditch on the left. And I can almost see the existing yellow sidewalk that you have, it seems to be stopped. But if it could just curve around and just head up Glenside, there is room. There's a big old stone wall, but you go right through the stone wall, and it's really a life or death thing.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
important. It's very important, and I haven't seen that on any of the.
No, thank you for bringing that up too. And so,
Yeah.
in thinking about these alternatives, again, really thinking about what is maybe that intersection alternative that we want to carry forward, and then with that intersection alternative, what are the possibilities? And so I will tell you right now, the reason that it stops right here is because we recognize that we do need to maintain a driveway access there. It's not to say that we couldn't continue that defined space through there, but there is a driveway for that parcel at that location. Yes, so we could have a flush sidewalk segment through that driveway, and then depending on what we decide for Glenside Avenue in terms of the configuration for the intersection, then we could contemplate some additional enhancements at that location.
And a plus side of having that sidewalk is that you won't have any hapless people trying to walk across the traffic.
Yeah.
We would just stay on the side of the road until we came along to it.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that perspective, because I think in the last conversation, there really wasn't anyone who was vocalizing that they were walking from Glenside. So I really appreciate you bringing that up and bringing that forward. I think, let's see, I think we'll step forward and then we can loop back around to some of these trade-offs and have a bigger conversation about, how we're feeling about some of these options that are on the menu. So in this last one, I just want to recognize, and we'll zoom in on this a little bit deeper, but with this option, it really is reconfiguring all of Glenside Avenue and the intersection with Mill Street. So the current, and it's a little hard to see because it's sort of re-greened here, there is a wall that sort of works its way up on this corner. That would stay, and then we'd reestablish turf through here, potentially a sidewalk connection, now that we're hearing that. And then really reconfiguring this and creating more of a flat landing at the intersection. So you'd be coming down Glenside Avenue at a little bit of a steeper grade, and then it would flatten out at the end, so you would have sort of that level spot. And you'd be meeting essentially the crest of the hill that you sort of, as you're coming into town, you're coming over. It's a little hard to imagine that when you're looking down at it from above, but just to give you that idea, that crest of the hill is about at that location. And so really reconfiguring and reconstructing a new connection and roadway through there to meet Glenside Avenue. And the other thing to be thinking about here is just that would require a retaining wall, and certainly would have right-of-way impacts to that parcel on the corner. The other piece of this, I want to sort of shift to the north side. We really wanted to think through what a pedestrian path into the town-owned parcel would look like here. Yet to be seen what the sort of bank stabilization project is going to bring. So in this design, we're really focused on the pedestrian path and some fencing to sort of harden against, the bank that's pretty steep there for folks that would be using that space. But we were sort of relying on what comes out of the stabilization project to determine what sort of happens to the bank itself. But really thinking through just establishing that connectivity in terms of the pedestrian path and some of the elements that would go along with that. And again, with this one, a big welcome sign to sort of set that tone, and planting a tree line along the parcel to, again, just sort of establish that it's a place that folks should start to slow down. Yeah.
So just to point out that anything that we design for here has to go through FEMA.
Yep.
So it's similar to what Christine's saying about the post office has to weigh in. FEMA has to weigh in on whether or not it's allowed because they have provided the funds to purchase.
Yeah, and so for a lot of these menu options, a lot of the permitting is similar across them, but for some of those elements, like you said, approval from the post office, approval from FEMA, we've gotten familiar with what's allowed and not allowed on a FEMA buyback parcel, so contemplating some of those elements, but definitely something to keep in mind in terms of those approvals. Yep.
If you could go back, one question, since we're trying to signal you're coming into a village, and there's an intersection there, there's concern if people are still driving like it's a highway. Is there a reason the sidewalk couldn't continue on the north side as opposed to the pedestrian path? And that would be a visual signal that you're driving along and suddenly there's a sidewalk. Is there room for it?
So we did look at it as an option. It is tricky through there. It does fall off pretty quick. So we're already constrained. There is an existing wall on this side and certainly a steep slope. So, we can't shift anything in this direction. And when we looked at sort of the drop off through this area, it's really tough in terms of the geometry. And so the decision to not go down that path, just in terms of the constructability, from this view, it's like, yeah, great, let's just continue the sidewalk. But when we look at it in the third dimension, it's really tricky through there. It's a pretty tight, constrained environment.
There would be a possibility of taking that hump out. There's a hump in the road there that if you were to level that out, right at the intersection, that would give you
the crest of the road right here.
Better sight lines all along.
Yeah, and one of the things that we contemplated with this option is instead trying to sort of meet that crest of the hill, because if we take it out, if you can sort of think about it again in your mind's eye, if we take out the crest of that hill, this part gets lower, which means Glenside gets even steeper to meet that point. So this was sort of the balancing act of those two things by reconfiguring the sort of Glenside approach and creating sort of a flat landing there.
Over to the east, as it is, right, on this one?
Yes, and this one we'd be
higher.
Shifting the intersection further
It puts it up
east.
higher then,
Yeah.
as opposed to if you flattened it out.
Yeah.
The low end is on if you went west.
Yes.
Is there any talk about what the town parcel is going to be used for, or ideas on that?
I would look
Flood
to
storage.
I beg your pardon?
Flood storage.
Okay, flood storage.
Riparian plantings, flood
Okay,
storage.
gotcha.
It's
I was just at the other meeting where we were talking about storing like.
Yeah, no, not our
That's not where we're gonna, that's not where we're parking the trailer.
Nope, we don't have the trailer there.
green space.
We just might put a lot of water
Green
there.
space.
one
Yeah.
day.
Yes.
We'll put the trailer there and float it down the road.
Public access to Little Moyle.
again, zooming zooming way in on the intersection with Mill Street and Main Street, not a whole lot different on this one than alternative 2. Am I missing anything, Joe, on this one? It's very similar to alternative 2.
This might have been discussed in a previous meeting, but what would be an alternative to move that, the one that crosses Main Street up? Like closer towards the bridge? Can we not do that, or like, is there a reason why you couldn't push it back?
Crosswalk. So you're
That
saying
crosswalk
move the
move it
crosswalk
up.
this
Then
way?
you don't lose your parking spaces, it's a much safer space up there to cross.
Yep.
Once you're around that corner,
Stop.
you
People
can
don't
actually
do it. And this is like 14, 15, Woodley Light intersection.
Yes.
People come there and they see where they want to go, and they're not going to walk up and over and come back. And they'll cross the closest way. So you can put it there. We talked about this in the planning
Okay,
commission.
that's
quite
what
a
I
bit.
was asking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you'll build it, they won't come.
It's
They'll just
just-
go across.
None of those crosswalks.
I will say that the choice for this location was based on actually sitting out there and watching what folks do, and folks cross right across that intersection without, thinking twice about it. And I will tell you that there were a number of vehicles that were not looking for someone crossing at that location, so.
Do you think they will if there's a crosswalk? I don't think they will.
I think that with, some markings and signage and certainly with the bulb outs, I think it helps to sort of give that visual cue that you have to be really intentional about making that turn. And I'd say the sort of pro to having it at the intersection is this is where you're stopping traffic, at least for one of those conflicts with the pedestrians. So that's really what we were looking for on that one.
Those sidewalk things come out. There's a lot of tractor trailers that go around that corner.
Yep.
Is that, that's like a right in front of Positive Poly kind of intersection.
It's tight.
Especially if those are out.
So what these would be is actually, this would be a beveled curb with a mountable section. So as a pedestrian, you would actually start your crossing here. This would all be mountable, and then you'd sort of pass through the mountable space to make that crossing.
So it's not like,
Drive over it. It's not like
So
it's kind of flat like the roundabout.
it's not like the one in front of the clip joint that
Yeah,
gives
a car
you
is not
worth of
gonna,
space.
a car is not gonna wanna drive over it, but a truck can track over it,
Gotcha.
basically.
Gotcha.
So would you need, on this left side of that, would you need to block it off too because it's within 20 feet of that crosswalk?
You're saying this space.
Yeah, would you need one mirrored on the other side?
So with this angled parking,
No, the other side,
oh,
No,
Towards
it's
Mike's.
only upstream.
towards Mike's.
Yeah.
Would you need it there too?
these
Because
are
it's-
not parking spaces.
It's a tractor trailer truck parking space.
It's, they would call it an informal loading unloading zone.
And it's only on the upstream side.
Okay.
So it's the idea of somebody driving, coming along, if somebody's blocked and somebody's stepping out into the crosswalk, you can't see it. But if it's on
So
the
like-
other side, it's not a problem for it.
This one would need to be 20 feet, which I'm sure it is.
Gotcha.
But one on this side would need to be.
What if, on the clip joint side, right at where the hostel idea was, that parking area, what if you move that sidewalk down towards the post office, like Richard's old garage there?
If you're gonna add in that
Right,
other
you're gonna add
crossing
one.
one, why not push that one farther down?
You're saying this
Change the
one?
angle.
Right, kind of put that
Yes.
one next to where the post office one is now.
Yeah, further
Oh,
down.
take
And
out
then-
of the
down.
intersection
Right,
altogether.
and then you're not taking parking spaces away either. I can't stress it enough, that side of town, it needs parking, not sidewalks.
Because otherwise, you're just gonna have more people going to the laundromat and trying to carry their laundry, and they're just gonna keep jaywalking across
Right,
that
80 times the
street
laundry
there.
going across the
And they
street.
already do it now.
Yeah.
Is there any way, over here, I am Richard's widow. He owned the Cisco station. It's now sitting empty. Is there any way, you probably don't know the answer to this, but it just pains me to see that building sitting there falling apart. Is there any way the town could buy it and level it and make parking there?
Jointed property now with the bank building.
They combine the property because they own.
We separated them when we bought.
But when
You join
two
it on
owners own, when it's the same owner, it becomes
I
combined.
tried to take your shot.
Yeah.
Gonna cost
Because
us
we
more.
bought, when we bought both the bank building and that, and then we separated.
Yes.
And now it's.
But now he owns both properties.
Yes.
Mhm. So it's not.
Because that would be such good parking.
It would be
Yeah.
a lot of deal.
And I appreciate the creative thinking around the parking solution.
The one thing about that crosswalk is that that's the school zone. That's the school, it's where the kids, when they're coming from, when they're going up to go to Hazen, when they're doing anything on there, that is the route that they take, which is why we put those signs there, those are the flashers, because that is the route they take.
Now, is that like I don't know the word, like the legal route they have to take?
It's
Or
the
can
route
they
that's
cross and
it's the
then
route that is the best, walking, it's the route that's the best, the safest.
Minimal crossing. Yeah.
Because that's the side that has the best sidewalks and then has a crosswalk to get to the school.
Gotcha.
When we looked at this a couple of years ago, that was one of the things the school weighed in on and said, we really want you to protect, which is why that bump out is there, because that bump out protects anyone in that crosswalk from being hit by a car that goes to, what would happen is people would stop to turn and cars would come around to the right. And that's why that's there.
Yeah.
And we heard that a time and time again from the schools. So
But we
that's
were
just,
supposed to town, there was a crossing guard there.
yeah.
For the
And they-
elementary school.
And the school
Yeah,
does
yeah,
use, the school
that's
actually
scary.
puts a crossing guard there when
Yeah.
they're bringing the kids
Yeah,
up to Hazen.
Yeah.
It's because they have that multi-campus approach.
yeah,
Yeah.
Because they do try to put the two schools together as
Yeah.
much as possible,
yeah,
which is why the blinking signs are there.
yeah.
And
But-
from an engineering standpoint, definitely our preference and from a safety standpoint is to put crossings at intersections because folks are already slowing down to think about what they need to do as a vehicle. So they're already in that like heightened awareness, looking for things that they need to pay attention to make the next move. And so we really have a preference to have crossings at the intersection as opposed to mid-block crossing, which is why so many of our mid-block crossings need the flashers to help to build that awareness for folks, right? So it tends to be our preference in terms of the intersection.
To just play with, having been a crossing guard, having once had a business in that gray building to the right of Holton Street, and watched out that window for years, people almost get hit because they tried to cross in front of the inn and people didn't expect them to blah, blah, blah. But also suffered with the lack of parking availability on the street. People would come and park big lawn campers and stuff right in front of our building because it was the only place where there was that extensive amount of space because they didn't know there was public parking down by Mill Street, by the market. I would like to see us have better big blue P parking signs directing people to our public parking off-street to allow for people using the laundromat and the very local spots to be able to access it when there's someone who's going to just do a longer term parking, but they don't recognize as you come around onto Mill Street. If you're not familiar with the town, there's nothing to tell you there's public parking down the way. And even as you look down past the post office from that vantage point, you do not see the parking lot.
Yeah.
So the P would have to be at Mill Street Market, at the co-op market, pointing across to the public parking for you to see it from that vantage point.
Yeah.
So it's just a thought that maybe for some of a little relief for the people who are really obviously stressed about the downtown parking, which is an issue.
Yep.
To try and use, some of the side pieces
Yeah.
to their full advantage.
Yeah, and there is a science to that parking wayfinding, so we could definitely tap into that and give some guidance around that, but that's a great idea.
We talked about the last meeting, colors on the crosswalks and maybe lights. Is there anything coloring that you're gonna do, or is it gonna be just the traditional white?
So, these crosswalks
But they're
are,
white there, so that's why I was,
Right,
yeah.
they tend to be the most visible, which is why we have a preference for that particular type of a pavement marking for our crosswalks. I know that some towns have a preference for like red with the white lines on both sides. There's all sorts of configurations, but these are from the sort of engineering safety side of the coin, they are the ones that are most visible, so they are the ones that sort of show up to the driver most and build, again, that awareness. So it tends to be our preference when we put designs together.
And we also talked about them being raised a little bit, which could slow people down a little.
Yeah,
at least at
so,
those locations.
We
Any
did
thought
have
about that?
We did have some internal discussions about raised components. I do think through your sort of main corridor, the raised components can be a little tricky. We could, we had talked about like floated the idea of a raised intersection, but given some of the drainage challenges that are already present, it felt like a step too far to then have maybe some bigger drainage issues that we'd be causing with a raised element.
Talked at the beginning of town when you're coming into it, doing it there, which makes them automatically slow down.
Yep.
And then they'll continue that maybe slow speed into town.
Yeah, and I think, if there's, I welcome the dialogue. If there's appetite for some of those, we call them, in engineering, we call them vertical deflection. Vertical deflection elements, speed bumps, speed humps, some of those elements. If there is the appetite for that, we can certainly explore that. But we hesitated. We've done this with enough communities that we hesitated to put that on the menu of options necessarily. I'm going to try to go in the order that I saw them come up. So go ahead.
Yeah, good. If I could bring the conversation for a second back to Glenside.
Mm-hmm.
When you're driving down Glenside, to turn left, by far the biggest issue is the speed of traffic barreling through from the east. And I don't think anybody drives 25. A lot of people drive 35. I can't time it, but I guess some people are at 40 by the time they. So it's very difficult to safely turn left there.
Yeah.
So 2 questions
Sure.
or suggestions. One, once you get into town, right between Hayes Garage and the co-op, there's the flashing speed detection thing, I don't know what you call that. I realize that serves a purpose for the traffic from that point on, but if that were at the start of Mill Street, it's just one element that might slow people down.
Sure.
Because that's, it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Plus that blinking light is next to the fire hydrant.
Yeah. One other thing, am I right that you can't do anything that's to the east of Mill Street once you're on 15?
We could, but it's, more of a challenge in terms of, you have a lot of ability to influence what happens once you're on the Class 1 town highway. So that line is essentially where the old driveway is for the town parcel. And so to the east, it's a little more challenging. Not doable, but a little more challenging.
The reason I ask is because if that blinking speed detection device were even a bit before that, for instance, excuse me, where the 25-mile-an-hour sign is.
Mm-hmm.
That's even more
That'd be great.
in advance
Yep.
to give people a chance to slow down. The other thing, and maybe this is radical, I don't know, but is there any possibility, in addition to moving that, is there any possibility on that lane, that incoming lane, to put, not speed bumps, but, I don't know, little things that you drive over?
Rumble strips.
Yes. Because there again, and a bit before you get to Glenside, to,
Yep.
you know,
Yeah.
do whatever you
Yeah.
can to slow people down
Yeah.
in a reasonable way.
Yep, yep. So there are a couple of different applications to rumbles. We do have to be really careful about where we use them. So there's certain distances from residences and some other elements that we have to be cautious of, but we can certainly look into that as an option. One thing as you were speaking that just came to mind is there are also like pavement marking options, so call them transverse markings, where you can add pavement markings that progressively get closer and closer. So as a driver, it looks like you're getting faster and faster, but you're actually going the same speed. So it's this visual cue that you should be slowing down. So I think there's a couple of elements we can pull on, because I'm definitely hearing that we need a little bit more in the menu of options in terms of that gateway treatment and that transition zone. So we'll definitely pull on some of those threads to add a few more elements to the sort of menu for that piece, and including the radar speed feedback sign, which is what in the shop we call those flashing signs that tell you you're going too fast.
Very compact streets.
But not construction. I mean, it's so easy to sign up.
Yes, yes, we can,
Yeah, you could-
that is not a huge undertaking to move the sign. Yes,
So back to parking.
Yeah.
And thinking about
That's only you
parking
can put the sign
signage,
anywhere.
and that's a really great
That's a
idea.
great
because,
idea.
yeah, if you don't already live here, you don't know where else you could park. But I'm wondering about, once the swinging bridge happens and we can park over at Daniel's Block again? Yeah. Because that was really that was a great location. You could walk so easily. We still have to think about how to let people know about that too.
Yep.
And how many P signs can we have downtown? And how would that change how we might route people for parking? Right.
yeah. Yeah, as I said, there is a whole science to that parking wayfinding thing. So we have helped some communities with that, but I would look into, exactly what we'd want to sort of be pointing folks to and when. So you have to really think about when are you capturing those folks and pointing them in the direction of, to your point, parking that maybe isn't as obvious because there's a pedestrian bridge between the main drag and where that is, right? Yep. So you might want to be capturing folks right as they're coming into the town from the west, as opposed to sort of our core area that we're thinking about here. But definitely a recommendation we can make, and we can pull in some pieces around what that could start to look like.
Tracy, this is going way back to something Rob said, but I wasn't fast enough in the conversation elsewhere. But the perennial puddle that Rob mentioned, that you always have to walk in the street. So that's one of the things, that's a sort of thing that I think they would aim to address. So you guys did study that whole stretch for where things aren't draining the way they ought.
Yeah, and I'd love to understand exactly where, because we saw it just after there was a lot of water, and then we saw it again today with water. So, but it would be helpful to understand sort of the extents of that.
Right. It's just from our truck traffic is what causes it. And when we repave, it's flat for a couple of months, and then truck traffic just compresses in a line. And coming off the hill, or coming out of the parking lot, it just settles in that spot, and it's a long, 30-foot puddle.
Okay.
And you can't get away from it because there's a concrete block that's the porch to 56 Mill Street.
Yep.
So there's no, you have to duck away, duck in the garage, is what I did, which I did today, and to avoid getting splashed. Because people are cruising down the road here, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And so that, the other thing is, you could change the geometry of Sumner Road, because it's just been, because the other problem is it's been getting paved, it just keeps, they just add 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches, and they've changed the geometry. It's much higher now than it was 10, 15 years ago, actually. The actual road has actually been changed by the way they just keep adding. It's a 6 to 8 inch drop off to where the old cement sidewalk is to 56 Mill. If you look at the paving job that's there, and that's just the last one.
Yeah.
And that pavement, I mean, that concrete sidewalk is supposed to be above the road, not 7, 8 inches or 6 inches under.
Yeah.
Yes, it started with the attributes.
So, I mean, it's not just, and then you could flatten out a spot at the bottom to make passage for
Yeah.
the sidewalk to complete the parking lot.
Yeah. Please.
Are there crosswalk markings other than paint? Because paint's visible for maybe 2 months of the year. And one other question, did your study look into street lighting at all? I had comments from a couple business owners today that it's quite dangerous at dark and this time of year. So just wondering about the lighting aspect at night.
Yeah. So lighting is something that we didn't dig into deeply to, but so there is some existing lighting, like off the top of my head, I'm thinking about like in front of the co-op, there are a couple of street lights that are sort of at the level that help to illuminate that area and the crosswalk that's in that area. But that crosswalk, for instance, doesn't have any signage in the existing configuration. So that's certainly one thing we rely on a lot when everything's snow covered. Those pedestrian signs at least indicate that, there is something there. It's covered in snow. There's not a ton that we can do in terms of like enhancing those pavement markings. I mean, we certainly can make them reflective, so they show up in your headlights, which is, I think, a helpful element.
I think our main issue is the paint lasts about 2 months or less. So I was just wondering, are there other things that you got, other solutions, like bricks or concrete or something flush, but that just is longer lasting, maybe more visible?
Even having the street light near to the crosswalk is a lifesaver. I saw somebody almost get hit. I don't know if it's lit differently now than it was at the time, but on Mill Street, crossing legally in the crosswalk, a child, but it was 5 o'clock in the middle of the winter and it was dark, and the only thing that saved that child from being hit was that there was a little teeny triangle of reflective wear on their backpack that caught the headlights, so you could not see a darkly dressed person in the crosswalk because there wasn't an overhead lighting.
And it is certainly something that, if we feel like we're going to consolidate a crossing on this stretch, if we think there are needs for lighting for the crossings on the other stretch, we can really dig into some of those elements, and certainly things that we just want to account for in sort of our preferred alternative and the cost estimate that goes along with that, so that we have a really good idea moving into the design phase, what elements there's a desire for. And that really is more of a design phase decision. And actually, we don't even add lighting to a project really in a substantial way until final plans. So like pretty far off in the design phase is when we're making those decisions. But it's helpful to know that there's a need for it from the community's standpoint, so that we know there's sort of that piece that we want to be accounting for in these early cost estimates, so that we can be ready for that and make sure we're chasing the right funds to be able to do that. Yeah.
I've read where traffic control on speed, they often try to go to the absolute minimum travel lane width and pinch in by using sidewalks or other pleasant-looking obstacles, if you will, to close in and narrow the travel lane, and supposedly automatically people will slow down because it's a little bit more difficult to pass through that. the use of your sidewalks here, or are there any other ideas you could use? Or are we stuck with a travel lane as defined as it is now?
It's a good question. So in these cross sections, we are carrying an 11-foot travel lane. So most of our like rural 2-lane roadways in Vermont have somewhere between an 11 or 12-foot travel lane, and then variable shoulder widths. Ideally wider, but definitely varies from nothing to 8 feet, depending on where you are. And so to your point, yes, like our goal is always to make folks feel more constrained. So even adding in, like in one alternative, we're adding in just that curb section. So not even the sidewalk, but just that curb, again, to sort of give that visual cue that the roadway environment is constrained and you should be going slower. Some of the things that help with that, and back to your point about the crosswalk pavement markings, is that if there's a way we can keep up with the edge lines, which gives, again, that visual cue to the 11-foot lane, because we do have to have some shy distance to our curb, but if we can give that visual cue that it's a tight lane, people tend to slow down. So if we can keep up with remarking the edge lines, I understand it, that is a big maintenance ask, but if we can keep up with those on a sort of semi-annual basis, that does help to make folks feel constrained and slow down. Does have that effect, yeah.
Could I just ask for a clarification on the bump out that's close to the laundromat?
Yep.
So do you have to do the two sides, or could you do the bump side that's on the second part? Do you have to have both pieces? Because I pulled up the map and I can see what Derek and Lisa are talking about. Right now, there is a secondary
parking spot there, yes.
Yeah, there's a second. It's
not
hatch marked.
You can see in the aerial image that there is someone parked there. What we have traced over and pulled forward are the parking lines from the repaving project. So if there is a parking spot there, it's outside of what I think what V-Trans had carried forward for their restriping plan.
Yeah, that is correct.
And I think the challenge there is that really for this crossing, we really, technically we need to have that 20 feet in front of that crossing. So recognize that is a trade-off that you all are grappling with in terms of that parking space. To answer your original question, Kristen, there's no reason that we have to do both of these. It just extends the crossing distance, and again, you don't get, I think on this corner in particular, if you ever look out in the intersection, there is a pile of debris right in about this location that accumulates, and that's because people are using this when there's not a car parked there. People are using this as their turning lane, right? So in terms of creating more safety for all of the users of the intersection, including people who are in vehicles, really constraining folks to just one lane that approaches and having to be intentional about that turn has a lot of benefits in terms of safety. So that's really what we're thinking about when we zoom out and think about what configuration might work. Taking up this space that currently, folks are either driving here or they're driving through, and you get that debris pile that accumulates because no one's driving in that spot. That's sort of the visual cue that we're looking at in terms of, where is an appropriate place for that bump out. All right, I am going to tick forward. There are just a couple of, so part of our process is to look at, we looked at the detail of this, correct? Okay. Part of our process is to look at an evaluation matrix, and this is our way of sort of summarizing all of the different sort of trade-offs and things that we need to contemplate as we progress any one of these alternatives forward. We've done this in sort of a group alternative, the menu options in alternative 1, group the menu options in alternative 2, group the menu options in alternative 3, and then look at sort of holistically what the impacts of those might be, just as a way of sort of consolidating that evaluation. What this does is it helps to highlight some of those trade-offs and some of the things that we need to be thinking about as we progress the project and some of these improvements forward. So I'm just going to step through a couple of these. We don't need to go into detail, but it might help for some people to think about the different alternatives in this way. Thank you, guys. So in terms of engineering safety, we just, and this is all stuff you'll see in the report, but stuff we have to document as part of this process. So the typical facility dimensions, we were just talking about those 11-foot lanes with the 2-foot shoulders. Again, really thinking about, that striping and making sure that visual cue exists when it can. And then the curbed sidewalk. In terms of bicycle safety and mobility, just recognizing that, through this space, we're thinking about carrying forward some of the previous recommendations in terms of sharrows, but we're in a really constrained environment. So it's not an environment where, we have so much space that we can add that 5-foot bike lane and all these other things that, we're recognizing that we want to create that bike landing place so that when folks are coming down the hill from the trail and want to pop into some of the places around town, they have an opportunity to lock their bike and go and sort of visit the places around town. In terms of pedestrian safety and mobility, when we look at alternative 1, certainly improved. The traffic calming effects from the bump outs and other treatments, that sort of continuity of the sidewalk on the north side and establishing that as sort of the safe passage for pedestrians. But then, stepping into alternative 2 and alternative 3, really enhancing that pedestrian space and safety in terms of the sort of package of alternatives that are there, especially creating that crosswalk where the desire line is on the north side of the intersection with Mill Street and Main Street. And then recognizing in alternative 3, we have that sort of consolidation of crosswalks to one place where, we've created our level landings and all the things that come with sort of an accessible crossing. And then for driver safety and mobility, so sort of thinking about the vehicular mode with alternative 1, certainly some traffic calming effects, realignment of Main Street and some of the bulb outs and bump outs, and some of the gateway treatments. But then with alternative 2 and alternative 3, sort of progressing through some of those improvements to Glenside and improving upon the geometry there and the sight lines that are associated with the movements at that intersection. In terms of impacts, again, sort of stepping from left to right here, alternative 1, 2, and 3, just a couple of things that jump off the page. So certainly with changes to the Glenside intersection, we're talking about some right-of-way impacts. So recognizing that, there are some implications in terms of that component of this, especially when we get to alternative 2 and 3. Historic resources. So it's a historic district. There are some historic resources. We have to have some keen awareness around those locations. If we're changing sort of the sidewalk in front of a historic resource, we just have to have that awareness. And I think with most of those, it'd be what we call a de minimis finding. Basically, we're not having an impact that is going to change sort of the nature and character of those historic resources. So, there are some potential for things we have to do in terms of the permitting and getting through some of the permitting phases, but not anything that's jumping off the page at us in terms of like a constraint that we can't work through. In terms of archaeological, there is a sensitive area that's been identified as part of the town-owned parcel to the east end of the project area. And so with that pedestrian path in alternative 3, there may be some steps that we need to go through in terms of clearing that component of the work. So we may have some like I said, just additional steps to the process that we would have to take to sort of clear that area from an archaeological standpoint.
What is this significant? I mean, do you know what the sensitivity is?
So at this stage in the process, what we do is our archaeologist goes out and actually puts eyes on the scene, looks at all the resources that have been previously mapped, and then goes out and does a site walk to understand, and is just trying to identify from above ground, areas that look like, they haven't been disturbed, maybe could have some resources. So for that one, I think it was just an identified area that he had acknowledged had some sensitivity, but we haven't done anything below ground to say, oh, this is a previously disturbed soil and we wouldn't expect to find anything here. So there are some steps to that process that he would help take us through if that were the case. And all of that information and all the reporting on those elements will be part of the scoping report that we put together. So that information will be available to everyone to take a look at. And if folks have questions or want to dig in more, I mean, the drafts of those reports are already sort of compiled. So if you want to see that map, we can certainly, we can certainly pull that forward. Floodplain, certainly, again, with that connection into the parcel to the east, we are into the floodplain with that, but otherwise we're really in mostly previously disturbed sort of roadway environment spaces with many of the elements that are on the menu here. A few of these others, we always sort of highlight hazardous materials. Anytime we're passing by a gas station and we're saying we're going to do something, we sort of highlight that as there's potential always with gas stations for there to be something that we find. So just flagging that. But that's across the board. Section 4F gets into some of our historic resources. So that, again, is something that it's just some steps in the process that we would have to take for any of those. Utilities, there are some impacts to utilities. We talked about certainly the utility pole that's in the sort of center of the Y at the Glenside Avenue intersection that with some of the alternatives we'd have to move or find a new location for. And a couple of the stormwater structures. I think we're avoiding with the sidewalk a hydrant and some of these other elements, but just keen awareness around those and things that we can work through in the design phase. And then finally at the bottom here is blocked, and I don't know what the last resource is there. Get that out of the way. Oh, impervious surfaces, just some minor changes to those. And these are all things that we think about these impacts because for most of those impacts, there are some additional steps in the next process that we need to be thinking about. So anticipated costs, next item on the sort of evaluation matrix. So with the elements that you're seeing sort of packaged into alternative 1, alternative 2, alternative 3, that's how we get to this number. I will tell you this is in today's dollars, and with many of our projects lately, especially with costs rising at the rate that they are, what we'll end up doing towards the end of this process is coming up with a sort of phased implementation plan. So it's our way of giving the community a blueprint to say, okay, this is, if it were us, here's what we recommend in terms of tackling sort of one piece at a time. And so what that does is we'll try to help sort of create that blueprint so that as you take this phased approach and implement some of these improvements, we'll also give recommendations about like what is the appropriate funding to try to go after to make that improvement, and you sort of meet the criteria for that funding, and we'll sort of break it into parts. So these are big numbers that have a lot of elements sandwiched into them, but we can also parse them apart and think about moving the radar speed feedback sign is probably not a big undertaking and probably could be done with town staff and resources. So that's something we could have as one of those like very short-term improvements that could make a big impact and have that as part of our implementation plan in sort of that short-term bucket. But maybe, changes to the geometry at Glenside Avenue intersection is one of those longer-term things, and we really think about what grants or other funding sources might we need to be contemplating and working towards to be able to do that work. So we will try to help put together sort of that phased implementation as part of what is the preferred alternative. Yeah, please.
Well, I used to live off of Glenside when my kid was little, and they couldn't run a bus down Glenside because of how dangerous it was to pull out at the bottom of the hill. Would any of these plans make it more of an option to that neighborhood to have a school bus?
That is a great question, and I mean, my gut sense from the couple of layouts that we came up with, alternative 3 is certainly the one that gets you the most safety impact, right? So that is reconfiguring the intersection to have that sort of more level landing as you're pulling up to the intersection, and it brings you to the crest of the hill so that you can actually see what's coming, and so that what's coming can see you. And so that's really, in terms of safety, that is probably the one that I would point to. I do think that incrementally we can move towards safety improvements, but when we think about the safest option, that is the safest option.
I second what was said about needing a sidewalk
Yep.
right on the turn there because of that.
Yeah.
Because of cars having to go wide around students walking up and down after
Sure.
school.
Which comes to, I mean, there's no sidewalk on Glenside, and it could significantly use one for the speeds that people use.
Sure.
Glenside, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's a dead-end sidewalk that that's being proposed right now. It really needs to continue till you get up
That's what the
farther.
other woman said. Yeah,
What, is
yeah,
that-
somebody else said
okay,
that earlier, yeah.
Yeah, no sidewalk.
Yeah, so as we sort of step through those packages of alternatives, like I said, big numbers that are on the screen in terms of, alternative 1, about $500,000. Alternative 2, about $600,000. Alternative 3, now we're tipping into, over $1 million in today's dollars. So we're at about 1.2 with the current cost estimate. And that's sort of everything that you've seen on the screen. Now we can sort of pick from the menu of options, like I said, and we would rework that cost to figure out sort of what the appropriate cost is for those elements, and then make that part of the implementation plan so we can have pieces that we can progress to make those improvements. A couple of other things that we consider here, just aesthetics, community character, economic impacts. These are all sort of a package of things that we look at as part of the evaluation matrix. We're saying, there are some improvements to certainly the aesthetics in terms of bump outs and curbs and creating those visual cues. It sort of creates that more formalized, core area and improvements. Community character, economic impacts, there are some minor benefits here, I think, particularly when we think about the recreational resources and the interaction with downtown. Conformance to the regional plan, which we reviewed as part of the existing conditions, and satisfies the purpose and need. And so that sort of loops back to the needs that we identified at the beginning, making sure that each of these sort of suites of alternatives will satisfy that purpose and need.
When you're talking about squeezing, Dave was talking about squeezing down the traffic. We need to do that in just little throttle points, because I drive emergency vehicles, ambulance, and when you have traffic bottlenecked up at 14 and 15 at positive pi, and that you're trying to get through town, they need places that trucks and cars can move out of the way.
Yeah.
I wiggle my way through there, and it's not fun. It's not easily done. Anyway, it can be pretty boggling.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and keeping that in mind, right? I don't think we're talking about moving all the curb throughout the whole corridor, and we're talking about some bulb outs at the intersection, and maybe some other places where we sort of constrain that environment, but recognize that there still needs to be passage. Yep, absolutely. So with that, I'd love to open it up to any other thoughts, feelings, questions. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
We are getting to the end of the time frame that we had established.
Yep. So recognizing that, I think, we have heard a lot of the preferences that have come out, but I guess, give folks just 1 or 2 minutes. If you have any other preferences or thoughts about any of the menu items that we discussed tonight that you want to identify here for the group.
A former neighbor of mine, off Walker Glenside, wrote into some board forum that she would like to see reestablished a mirror, one of those boat mirrors at the foot of Glenside that helps the person entering the road see what's coming from the right.
Yeah. So it's a great point and one that came up as part of the local concerns meeting. Unfortunately, me as an engineer cannot recommend that treatment. It is something that is not, I shouldn't say allowable, but not really allowable in terms of, our standards that we have to conform to. So it is something that you often will see on like a private parcel to help with that sight line, but not something that we feel comfortable making a recommendation about because of some of the limitations that come with it. Yeah, please.
Can you just reiterate again about why the consideration was to close off, a potential close off of Sumner?
Yeah, so the trade-off there is really that with how steep that road is and where it comes into Mill Street, there's really not an option for us to create a safe sidewalk connection or a safe crosswalk connection across that roadway. So, it comes in really steep, and what we would need to do is cut that back and make it even steeper to then come to a level place where we could have our sidewalk come through. And so what's tricky about that is that it is already so steep that it's sort of, it feels uncomfortable in a car already. It would be extremely uncomfortable to then come into a level landing, and the geometry doesn't quite work in terms of the standards we need to meet. And so the idea is to create that sidewalk along the south side. We're contemplating, closing that off, and there are some other ideas about making other connectivity that could be part of that option. But really closing that off to create that sidewalk connectivity in a way that is compliant and sort of meets the criteria it needs to.
So then the only access to Sumner would be off Glenside or off Holton Hill,
Yes.
which is not the best option when you've got an ambulance or you've got school children.
Yep.
Or,
Yeah, and recognizing that limitation and something.
I think,
Yeah.
and the plowing, somebody, I think it was Mary that brought up the plowing and where that snow is going to go, and that a plow is going to have to back up. And, I can't go right out of my driveway, so that means I'm going up Holton Hill and down by the elementary school.
Well, I hope if that isn't somehow addressed otherwise, that we will then keep 2 crosswalks on Mill, like by the post office and by the market, so you can, if you have mobility issues, which I do, and have slipped on that ice there before and everything, that you could have a walk around, a workaround.
No, and appreciate that perspective. That's really what we're looking to draw out.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that the way that came out of participation at the last meeting, like these guys weren't proposing that themselves. It was something that was raised from the group last time.
I would reiterate that you could change the geometry on Sumner by repaving it.
By removing the many repaving.
Excavating.
Yes, and I appreciate that perspective.
It really would change it.
We're looking at sort of the current.
Right. It was much
current
different
geometry,
years
so
ago, 25,
very
30
much
years ago when
appreciate
I
that.
moved there. It was quite a bit different than it is now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would there be any way to, as part of this study, to determine at a sort of high level if it's feasible at all to carry out Christine's suggestion of extending the road over, like closing off Sumner, the bottom of Sumner, but running across to, is the next one Holden? No, not
No,
Holden.
it's Perry Lane.
Perry Lane.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something at like the high level feasibility scale, we could, if the appetite and sort of the consensus is building towards that option, we could look at, okay, so that means it's going to be post office approval. There's, so much right of way that the town would have to acquire. So there are some implications to that, right? So we could weigh those impacts as part of that option to carry forward would be, and if that is a non-starter unless that is part of the project, like we can characterize what that trade-off would look like and sort of what the implications and impacts would be.
I just wonder if you look at it at a high level, maybe, and just determine if there are or are not, like,
Engineering
topographic
conditions.
conditions that make it not work.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, we can certainly take a look and see if that, characterize what it would take to sort of get to that place as part of that alternative. Yep.
Price point, there's quite a leap from 2 to 3, but 3 included an extensive trail and a bank stabilization
Yes.
to reach that property. Could you break that out perhaps and caveat
Yes, and
that
this
portion of it?
This is why Joe created a cheat sheet for me. The Glenside Avenue intersection improvements, so with alternative 2 and that sort of reconfiguration, we're talking about $100,000, and then that leaps when we're talking about, changing where it meets Mill Street, a retaining wall to achieve that, all the sort of grading that would have to come in with that one, and then reestablishing some turf and all of that. We're talking about closer to $450. So it is quite a leap there in terms of that part of the project. The path connection that we're talking about, so the path and the fencing, we're not accounting for sort of the stabilization and some of the other elements that would be part of the other project. But that one is $160,000, and I think those were all the pieces that you were hoping for, right? Okay. Yeah, and certainly those are all characterized in the documentation. So as part of the draft scoping report, you'll see all those details.
If you were going to do the end of Glenside over, if you could also at the same time do the end of Sumner, where Sumner intersects with Glenside, which is it's a one-way. Off Glenside is the only practical way. It's very hard to go up Glenside, make the turn, and crawl onto Sumner. Yeah. That should be included. It wasn't on the drawings, as far as I see.
Okay.
I mean, as far as it's a tight Y, and we should change that to be a T as well.
Yep.
It might be possible.
Yeah.
But we also have to remember that this is a Mill Street, Main Street.
This was called Mission Creek.
No, I know.
We could keep going.
It's 50 feet up. Well, no, but if you're...
It's a desire line.
And I think one of the things that we really want to make sure is that if there is something we are carrying forward here and there are impacts, that we're making sure we're bringing those impacts to the fore so everyone has a chance at them. All right, just a quick thought here on next steps. So selecting and refining a preferred alternative is sort of the next thing that we are going to be working on. We're going to take all that we heard this evening and try to summarize that and bring it back to the project team to work through what we think are sort of those menu items that are coming up and that folks want to see. We'll work on that draft scoping report and hopefully be back to have a conversation with the select board around that preferred alternative and wrap that up into a final scoping report so that we can take that blueprint and carry it forward and bring some of these elements into design and implementation. And that's it. Get in touch with me if you need anything. Thank you all. Thank you.